The rain started the night everything changed, the way it always does in the stories that ruin you. My name is Daniel Cole, 29 years old, ex-Army, currently employed as the private driver for Marcus Reyes, a man who owned half the waterfront property in the city and none of the patience to deal with people who weren't useful to him. I was useful. That was the whole of my value to him, and I'd made peace with that a long time ago. I hadn't made peace with his daughter. Elena Reyes stepped out of the Whitlow Hotel at 11:47 p.m. wearing a black dress that looked like it had been poured onto her. Mascara ruined in 2 dark lines down her cheeks, holding her heels in one hand instead of wearing them. She didn't wait for me to open the door. She just yanked it open and dropped into the back seat like the last hour of her life had cost her everything she had left. "Drive," she said. "Ms. Reyes. Just drive, Daniel. Please." I'd been driving her on and off for 8 months. Ever since her father decided she couldn't be trusted with her own car after the accident nobody talked about. In 8 months, she had called me by my first name exactly twice. Both times, something in the city was on fire, figuratively if not literally. I pulled out onto 6th Street and watched her in the mirror instead of the road for longer than I should have. She was staring out the window at nothing, jaw tight, one hand pressed flat against her sternum like she was holding something inside her chest from spilling out. "Everyone at that party has known me since I was 6 years old," she said, to the glass, not to me. "And not one of them actually knows me at all." I didn't answer. It wasn't my place to answer. That was the arrangement. I drove, I didn't ask, I definitely didn't care, or at least I wasn't supposed to. We hit the light on Delancey and I caught her eyes in the mirror. Really caught them, for the first time in 8 months of careful professional distance. There was something under all that guarded composure, something raw and drowning, and it hooked into me like a fishhook I hadn't seen coming. "Take me home, Daniel," she said. Then, after a pause that lasted exactly as long as it took the light to turn green, "Actually, no. Don't take me home. Ms. Reyes, your father. My father can find out I disobeyed him for one night in my entire life," she said. And there was something fierce underneath the exhaustion now, something that made her look less like Marcus Reyes's daughter and more like a woman I hadn't met yet. "Just drive. Anywhere that isn't that house." I should have called him. That was the job. That was the whole job. I turned right instead of left, toward the water. We ended up on the overlook above Cutter's Point. The city spread out below us in a smear of gold and red, rain starting to fleck the windshield in fat, unhurried drops. She got out of the car without asking, walked to the railing in her bare feet, and stood there like she was daring the wind to take something from her. I got out too. I told myself it was protocol. I didn't leave clients standing alone at cliffside overlooks at midnight. That was true. It was also not the whole truth. "You want to know what happened in there?" she said, without turning around. "Not my business, Ms. Reyes." "Elena," she said, "if you're going to stand out here getting soaked because you don't trust me not to jump, you can at least use my name." I hadn't considered that she might jump. Now that she'd said it, I couldn't stop considering it, and something cold went through me that had nothing to do with the rain. "I'm not going to jump," she said, reading my face the way she apparently read everything. "I'm just tired of being furniture at my own life. My father introduced me to a room full of investors tonight like I was a line item. My daughter, she'll be running the foundation next year, very decorative, very biddable." He didn't say biddable, but he meant it. "That sounds like a hard room to stand in." She turned then and looked at me properly. Daniel Cole, the driver, 6'2" of scar tissue and quiet obedience. Like she was seeing me for the first time too. "You've never once asked me a personal question in 8 months," she said. "It's not my place. What if I made it your place?" The rain was coming harder now. I should have ushered her back into the car, back into the version of the night where I was staff and she was the boss's daughter and neither of us said the things we were both very clearly thinking. Instead I stood there and let her study me, and I studied her right back, and something passed between us that had no professional name. "Elena," I said her name for the first time, and it came out lower than I meant it to. "Get in the car before you catch pneumonia standing out here proving a point to nobody." She almost smiled. "Almost. That's the first time you've told me what to do," she said. walking past me toward the passenger door. Not the back seat, the front. Close enough that I caught the smell of rain and expensive perfume and something underneath that was just her. I think I liked it. I didn't drive her home for another 2 hours. We sat in a 24-hour diner on the edge of the industrial district, a place her father's world would never touch, and she told me about her mother, who died when Elena was 19, and about the accident 11 months ago that had put a boy named Michael Ferris in a hospital bed and put Elena in a version of house arrest disguised as parental concern. She didn't tell me the whole story. I noticed the gaps. I noticed the way her hands stopped moving whenever she got close to something she wasn't ready to say. I told her almost nothing about myself. Old habit. Some things you learn to keep buried so deep that even you forget where you put them. By the time I dropped her at the Reyes estate at 3 a.m., something had shifted between us that neither of us said out loud, and both of us knew exactly what it was. "Thank you," she said at the door, hand on the frame of the car, not quite ready to close it, "for not taking me home. Ms. Reyes." "Elena," she corrected, softer now, tired in a different way than she'd been at midnight. "Good night, Daniel." I watched her walk up the stone steps into the house that owned both of our lives, and I sat in that driveway for 11 minutes after the door closed behind her, trying to talk myself out of something I already knew I couldn't stop. I met Julian Ashford 3 days later, and I hated him before he'd finished shaking my hand. He arrived at the estate in a car worth more than most people's houses, wearing the kind of smile that had never once in its life been told no. Marcus Reyes introduced him to the staff personally, which never happened, which told me everything about how much this man mattered to my employer's plans. "Julian's father and I have been discussing a merger for 2 years," Reyes told the assembled house staff, though his eyes were on his daughter, standing at the top of the stairs in a green dress that made my chest ache in a way I had no right to feel. "Julian will be spending quite a bit of time here. I expect him treated as family." Julian's eyes found Elena's the way water finds the lowest point in a room. He crossed to her, took her hand, kissed it with a theatricality that should have looked ridiculous and instead looked practiced, effortless, dangerous. "Elena Reyes," he said, "your father's told me so much. None of it prepared me." She smiled at him, polite, guarded, the same smile she gave everyone who wasn't me. I stood by the door in my driver's uniform, invisible the way staff are meant to be invisible, and watched a man who could give her everything I never would be able to: money, standing, her father's approval, set his sights on her with the calm certainty of a man who had never once failed to get what he wanted. That night, driving her to a gallery opening, Julian was also attending. She caught my eyes in the mirror the way she had 3 nights before. "You've been quiet," she said. "Not my place to be otherwise. You keep saying that like it's true." A pause. "Julian asked about you today. Wanted to know how long you'd worked for my father." Something in my chest went very still. "What did you tell him?" "That you were the only person in that house who's ever been honest with me." She held my gaze in the mirror a beat too long. He didn't like the answer. I pulled up outside the gallery. Cameras were already flashing. Marcus Reyes's world came with cameras, always. I got out to open her door, and for just a moment, before the flashbulbs found her and she became Elena Reyes, foundation heiress, decorative and biddable, she looked at me like I was the only real thing in a night made entirely of glass. "Daniel," she said, so quiet only I could hear it, "don't let him make you disappear." I didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. I would. By the end of that week, I understood 2 things with terrible clarity. The first was that I was in love with a woman I was paid to drive, a woman whose father would end my career and probably my freedom if he so much as suspected what was growing between us. The second was that Julian Ashford was not what he presented himself to be, not the golden heir, not the harmless suitor her father had handpicked. Twice I'd caught him watching Elena with an expression that had nothing to do with romance in it at all. Once, in the hallway outside her father's study, I'd overheard him on the phone, voice low and clipped, saying words that didn't fit a man merely courting a woman. Leverage and the Reyes name, and once the merger's signed, none of it matters what she thinks. I didn't know yet what secret Elena was carrying. The one that made her hands go still every time the accident came up. The one Julian seemed to already know more about than he should. I only knew that something dark was moving beneath the surface of the Reyes estate, and that Elena Reyes, beautiful, guarded, fighting a war nobody else could see, was standing directly in its path. That night she called me at 1 a.m., voice shaking, and said 4 words that ended any chance either of us had of walking away clean. "I need you, Daniel." I broke every rule I had after that call. I told myself it started as protection. She'd found something in Julian's coat pocket while he was asleep on the estate's east terrace after too much wine. A photograph of the accident scene, close-up, time-stamped, the kind of photograph that only exists if someone was documenting rather than reporting. She'd called me shaking because she didn't know who else in that house she could trust. And the answer, devastatingly, was no one but the driver. I met her at the boathouse at the edge of the property at 1:30 in the morning. And when she saw me, she didn't say anything at all. She just crossed the space between us and put her forehead against my chest. And I put my arms around her like I'd been doing it my whole life instead of never having done it once. "I don't know what he wants," she whispered. "I don't know why he has that photo. I don't know why my father brought him into this house. I'll find out," I said, and meant it with a certainty that should have frightened me. Instead, it felt like the first true thing I'd said to anyone in years. She pulled back enough to look at me. Rain from earlier still clung to the boathouse windows. City lights fractured through the water on the glass. And in that broken light, she looked at me the way no one had looked at me since before the army took the softest parts of me and didn't give them back. "You're not just my father's driver," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I admitted. "I haven't been for a while." She kissed me first. I want to be honest about that because everything after it was built on the fact that she chose me before I ever let myself reach for her. Her mouth was soft and certain and tasted like the wine she hadn't finished, and I kissed her back like a man finally allowed to stop pretending, both hands framing her face like she might vanish if I let go. "This is the worst idea either of us has ever had," she said against my mouth. "Yes," I agreed, and kissed her again anyway. The weeks that followed were the best and most dangerous of my life. We were careful. A driver and his employer's daughter learned to be careful very quickly. But careful only stretches so far when 2 people are drowning in each other. Stolen minutes in the garage before dawn. A hand finding mine under the console during drives no one else witnessed. Once, unbearably, a slow dance in the empty ballroom at midnight while the household slept. Her bare feet on top of my boots the way she must have done as a girl with her father, except this dance had nothing filial in it at all. "Tell me something true," she said one night, cheek against my chest, the record player skipping gently in the dark. "Something you've never told anyone." I told her about my brother, about the convoy, about the 11 seconds I still dreamed about, the ones I couldn't undo no matter how many times my mind replayed them trying to find a different ending. I hadn't said his name out loud in 4 years. I said it to her. "Marcus," I said. "My brother's name was Marcus. It's a strange thing, working for a man with the same name as the person I couldn't save." She didn't flinch from it, didn't offer hollow comfort. She just held on tighter, and I understood, in that moment, that this was what falling in love actually was. Not the boathouse kiss, not the stolen dance, but a woman letting you hand her the worst thing you carry and choosing to carry it with you instead of setting it down. "I have a secret too," she said. So quiet I almost missed it. "About the accident. About Michael. I haven't told anyone the whole truth. Not even my father." "Tell me." She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought she might, that the walls she'd built around that night might finally come down for me the way mine had come down for her. "Not yet," she said instead. "If I tell you, you'll look at me differently. And I can't. I need one person who doesn't look at me differently, Daniel. Just for a little longer. I should have pushed. I've spent every day since wishing I had pushed. I let it go instead because I was drunk on her, because I told myself there would be time, because loving someone that much makes you stupid in exactly the ways that get people destroyed. Julian noticed before her father did. Of course he did. Men like Julian Ashford make a profession of noticing weaknesses in other people's armor. He cornered me in the garage on a Tuesday afternoon, examining the Bentley's paintwork like he had any right to be there at all. "You're good at your job," he said. "Discreet. Loyal. The kind of man who doesn't ask questions." He turned. and his smile had teeth in it now, all the charm stripped away to show me what was underneath. I'd hate for that to change. Is there a point to this conversation? Elena is going to marry me, he said, with the flat certainty of a man reading a contract clause rather than describing a woman's heart. Whatever's happening between the two of you right now, and don't insult me by pretending nothing is, it ends the moment that merger is signed. Her father needs this deal, Daniel. Needs it in a way that would surprise you. He'll sacrifice a great deal to see it done. Including you. Is that a threat? It's a mercy, Julian said. Walk away now, and I forget I ever noticed. Keep going, and I promise you, you will not enjoy what happens to a man who gets in the way of what I want. I didn't tell Elena about that conversation. I've asked myself 100 times since why not, and the honest answer is pride. I didn't want her to see me as something that needed protecting from Julian Ashford's threats. I wanted to be the one person in her life who was simply uncomplicatedly strong for her. It was a mistake. It gave him room to move that I never should have allowed. The night everything nearly fell apart began with laughter, which somehow made it worse. We'd snuck away to the marina. Her idea, reckless and perfect, borrowed sweater and bare feet on the dock at midnight. Sharing a bottle of wine we had no business sharing on a boat we had even less business being on. She was laughing at something I'd said about her father's absurd collection of nautical clocks, head thrown back, and I remember thinking, with a clarity that frightened me, I would burn down everything I have ever built to keep this woman laughing like this for the rest of my life. Marry me someday, I said, and I hadn't meant to say it, hadn't planned it. It simply fell out of me the way true things do when you've had too much wine and too much happiness in too short a window. She went still. Then she smiled. Not the guarded smile she gave the world. Not even the soft one she gave only me, but something wider and more frightened and more honest than either. Ask me again when we're not hiding, she said. Ask me when I don't have to look over your shoulder every time you say something like that. I'm asking now. Then yes, she whispered, and kissed me like the answer was bigger than the word could hold. God help me, yes. We didn't see the camera flash from the shoreline. We didn't know, in that perfect, doomed moment, that Julian Ashford had followed us, that he had exactly what he needed now, that the happiest night of both our lives had just become the weapon that would nearly destroy us both. 3 days later, Marcus Reyes summoned me to his study, a manila folder on his desk, photographs spilling out of it like something already dead. You have 1 hour, he said, voice like a closing door, to get off my property, before I have you arrested for something considerably worse than trespassing. Behind him, through the study window, I could see Elena on the terrace, being led away by 2 members of the household staff, Julian's hand at the small of her back like he already owned her. She turned. Our eyes met across that impossible distance. She mouthed one word. Run. I didn't run. I should have, maybe it might have hurt less in the end. Instead, I spent 3 days in a motel room on the edge of the city, calling a number that had been disconnected, watching a house I could no longer approach, trying to understand how 11 days of the truest happiness I'd ever known had collapsed into nothing so completely. On the 4th day, Elena found me. She looked like a different woman than the one who'd said yes to me on that dock. Thinner, hollowed out, dressed in the kind of severe tailored clothes her father favored for her, like armor she hadn't chosen but couldn't take off anymore. You have to disappear, Daniel, she said, standing in the doorway of that ugly motel room like it physically pained her to be there. Not for a while. Completely. My father has people. Real people, dangerous people, and Julian. Her voice broke. Julian has proof. Photos. Enough to destroy your name so thoroughly you'd never work again. Maybe worse. I can't let that happen to you.
Elena.
I'm marrying him, she said, and the words came out of her like something being torn. The merger signs in 9 days. I'm marrying Julian Ashford, and you are going to let me, because if you don't, my father will bury you, and I will spend the rest of my life knowing I let that happen to save myself. This isn't you saving yourself. This is you disappearing to save me. There's a difference. Is there? Her eyes were wet, furious, devastated. Because from where I'm standing, it feels exactly the same. I reached for her and she let me hold her for exactly as long as it took her to fall apart and put herself back together, And then she stepped back, out of my arms, out of the doorway, out of the only version of a future I'd let myself want in 4 years. "Don't look for me," she said. "Please, Daniel. For once in your life, do what I ask instead of what you think is right." She was gone before I could answer. I didn't listen. Of course I didn't listen. What I found, over the following week, working with a private investigator I'd known since the service, a woman named Ruiz who owed me a debt from a life I didn't discuss anymore, was worse than betrayal. It was a trap 11 months in the making. The accident that put Michael Ferris in a hospital bed hadn't been Elena's fault at all. Michael Ferris was Julian Ashford's cousin, and the crash had been engineered. A payment trail leading back through 3 shell accounts to Julian himself, designed from the beginning to manufacture a debt Elena's family would owe the Ashfords, a debt that could only be settled one way, with a merger and a marriage and a woman who had spent 11 months believing she'd nearly killed a man out of her own recklessness, when in truth she'd been the target of a con so cold it made my hands shake reading the files. Elena's secret, the one she'd never told me, the one that made her hands go still, wasn't guilt over an accident. It was the unbearable weight of believing she deserved this, deserved Julian, deserved the cage closing around her, because some part of her had never stopped blaming herself for a crime that had never been hers to carry. And Marcus Reyes knew. Some of it, at least, knew the merger was leverage, knew Julian's father held debts over the Reyes empire that could collapse everything Marcus had built if the marriage didn't happen. He wasn't a villain in the way Julian was. He was a frightened man protecting an empire the only way he knew how, and he had decided, with the brutal calculus of men like him, that his daughter's heart was an acceptable price. I had 4 days before the wedding. I had evidence that could unravel everything. And I had no way to reach the one woman who needed to see it, because Julian Ashford had made very sure of that, cutting off her phone, her friends, her every route back to me, until the woman I loved was as isolated inside that estate as a prisoner in a very beautiful cell. I went to the house on the 3rd night. I got as far as the garden wall before Julian's security found me, and what happened next left me in a hospital bed of my own. 3 cracked ribs and a message delivered in Julian's own voice, calm as a man discussing weather. "Come near her again, and next time I won't be merciful." From my hospital window, I watched the society pages announce the Reyes-Ashford wedding, 48 hours away, and Elena's photograph beside the headline. Beautiful, composed, and utterly, unmistakably hollow behind the eyes, the way only I would have recognized. I had 36 hours to save the only thing I had ever truly wanted, 3 cracked ribs, no allies inside that house, and a folder full of truth that meant nothing if I couldn't get it into her hands. Elena, meanwhile, stood in a fitting room being sewn into a dress for a man she despised, believing, because Julian had made very sure she believed it, that I had taken the money he'd offered me to disappear, that I had chosen safety over her the moment things became difficult. She believed I had abandoned her. I would learn, later, that this lie broke something in her more thoroughly than anything Julian had done before it, because it meant, in her darkest hour, that even the one person she trusted completely had turned out to be exactly like everyone else. Neither of us knew the truth the other was carrying. Both of us believed we'd lost each other completely. The wedding was in 36 hours, and somewhere between his lie and my silence, we had become strangers again. Ruiz got me into the estate the morning of the wedding through the service entrance Julian's security hadn't thought to guard, because men like Julian never imagine the driver matters enough to watch. I found Elena alone in the dressing room 20 minutes before the ceremony, veiled, motionless, staring at a version of herself in the mirror that looked like a beautiful stranger. "You shouldn't be here," she said, not turning around. Her voice had no fight left in it. "Julian said you took the money, that you left." "I didn't take anything," I said, closing the door behind me. "I've spent every hour since that motel room trying to get back to you. Elena, look at me." She turned, and the devastation on her face when she saw the truth of it. Really saw it, the bruised ribs I couldn't fully hide, the exhaustion, the 4 days of fighting my way back to her, undid something in both of us at once. "He lied to me," she whispered. "He's been lying to you for 11 months. I put the folder in her hands. "The accident wasn't your fault, Elena. It was never your fault. Michael Ferris is his cousin. The whole thing was staged to trap your family into this marriage. Julian didn't fall in love with you. He engineered you. I watched her read it. Watched 11 months of self-blame and guilt and quiet, private grief collapse in real time as the truth finally reached her. Watched fury replace it, clean and total and long overdue. My father, she said, voice shaking now with something other than grief. Does he know? Some of it. Enough that he chose the merger over you anyway. She was quiet for a long moment, the folder trembling in her hands, the veil still pinned in her hair like a promise neither of us intended to keep anymore. Then I have 2 men to face today, she said. And I'm done being afraid of either of them. She walked down that aisle in her wedding dress, and for one terrible moment I thought I had misjudged everything. Thought I was about to watch her sacrifice herself anyway out of some impossible sense of duty to a father who'd failed her. Then she stopped at the altar, looked Julian Ashford directly in the eye, and set the folder down in front of 400 witnesses, her father and God. Michael Ferris is your cousin, she said, voice ringing clear through a church gone utterly silent. You staged the accident that's haunted me for 11 months. You built this entire relationship on a lie designed to trap my family into a merger you needed and I never agreed to. She turned to her father, and her voice broke. But she didn't stop. And you knew. Some of it. You knew, and you let me carry it anyway, because the company mattered more than I did. Julian's composure finally cracked, ugly and immediate. Elena, whatever he's told you, save it, she said. I have investigators, a paper trail, and 11 months of my life I am never getting back. You're done. Marcus Reyes stood, gray-faced, in the front pew. A man watching the empire he'd protected at his daughter's expense crumble in real time. Elena, please, we can discuss the company privately. There's nothing to discuss, she said. I am done being a line item in someone else's ledger. Both of you, security, Real security, not Julian's men, moved in at Ruiz's signal, alerted an hour earlier with enough documentation to make Julian's arrest a formality rather than a scandal. It wouldn't undo 11 months. It wouldn't undo the fear or the isolation or the wedding dress she was still, absurdly, standing in. But it was, finally, the truth spoken aloud, in the one room where it mattered most. She found me at the back of the church, where I'd been standing the whole time, 3 cracked ribs and a heart I'd spent 4 years pretending I didn't have anymore, fully hers now, entirely undone. You came back, she said. I told you once, I said. This was the worst idea either of us has ever had. And I'd have it again. Every version of it. Even this one. She crossed the aisle in her wedding dress, veil still pinned, and kissed me in front of everyone who had ever called her decorative and biddable and never once seen the woman standing in front of me now. A woman who had walked through fire, found her own truth inside it and chosen, at the very end, not safety, not her father's approval, not the empire she'd been born into. She chose the driver. Ask me again, she said against my mouth, echoing a dock at midnight and a bottle of wine and a promise made too soon and kept anyway. Ask me now, when there's nothing left to hide from. I didn't have a ring. I didn't have anything but the truth, finally, standing in the wreckage of a wedding that wasn't ours, in front of a church full of strangers who didn't matter and one woman who mattered more than anything I had left in me to give. Marry me, I said. Not someday. Now, when we're finally not hiding. Yes, Elena Reyes said, for the second time, in a wedding dress meant for another man, holding on to the only truth in the room. God help me, yes. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, the way it always does in the stories that ruin you and remake you in the same breath. We walked out of that church together into a city that no longer belonged to her father or to Julian Ashford or to anyone but the 2 of us, and for the first time since the night she told me not to take her home, neither of us had anywhere left to run to. We had, at last, only each other, and it was finally more than enough.